Okay, welcome to the 89th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm delighted to be speaking to Tom Greaves. Tom is an actor and comedian. He made an award-winning show called Goodbye Uncle Fudgy, which will be touring soon. The was shown in London. It will be in April this year, and it was also in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival last year. The story of A Goodbye Uncle Fudgy is him telling his story of the fallout from boarding school, and yeah, made it into a comedy as well. So, welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Piers.
I realized my introduction there wasn't ideal, but there we go. We went for it.
Well, the show will speak for itself.
Yeah. So, how I'd love to begin. I mean, one of the ways I love to begin is where I first came across your work, and it was at the Boarding School Survivors Conference in November 2023, and you gave a performance there. And I was really blown away, really touched by that. And I think, really touched me just you being so honest about your experience. So I'd love you to share, how did you get into the work you're now doing, Tom?
Um, I trained as an actor. Um, like went to a normal drama school and did a lot of I guess straight acting. Did a lot of ads with a lot of dads and ads. And but would always did a lot of a lot of fringe theatre, some other not so fringy proper theatre, and the odd bits in TV and film. And but then I went and trained in France at a famous clown school called École Philippe Gaulier, where Sacha Baron Cohen trained and Emma Thompson was kind of guru type teacher who's quite, he's quite cruel, and he kind of tries to bring out your, I guess, your authenticity, your vulnerability, and also, challenges, how much, it's about, he sees acting as really enjoying yourself on stage, finding that pleasure and that freedom. And for a boarding school boy, it was very challenging, but I think it started a process of opening me up. And you think as an actor you are open and you've done your training, but when I look back, I was at drama school, I definitely didn't know who I was. And I was always searching. And it was, I guess I started meditating 15 years ago. And you as an actor, you look at yourself and you're trying to find out who you are. Anyway, came back from this school. It's a kind of school where people who, you don't graduate with any, you don't get anything from it in terms of the industry, don't come and see you perform, in this little weird, well, not weird, but a small unknown town in France. And then you come back into the world, and a lot of people create their own work, a lot of solo shows, a lot of comedy stuff, a lot of quite alternative theatre. And I had this character, Uncle Fudgy, who I started doing character comedy nights in like Paris and London. And then I went to the boarding school survivors workshop, having, relationship breakdown, my life kind of imploding during COVID. And then I guess the idea of this character, Uncle Fudgy, being a vehicle through which to explore boarding school, and what I realized had such a huge impact on me. That kind of came together, and over the course of a couple of years, to develop this show that was kind of, it felt like, my whole life was kind of going into it. All my training, everything I had, my whole story, the most, personal, kind of tender, uncomfortable parts of, but truest parts of me were all kind of coming into this show. So it was great, but also quite challenging, quite quite exposing, especially when you put yourself in front of an audience with all that. You're really you're really exposed. But thankfully, it was very well received. People were people who weren't familiar with boarding school being a problem, whether they'd been to boarding school or whether from, the opposite kind of background. Everyone was, relating or understanding the story, which was incredibly validating because, the thing which, as you know, with boarding schools, you don't feel like you have any right to say anything about how hard or how that's affected you. So, even before the festival, I was very reticent to even post about it. I felt so much, oh, I can't say it. And didn't even mention boarding school actually when I started posting about it. I just said some, childhood trauma. I kept it quite vague. Same with flyering people on the street. I didn't feel like I wanted to I thought I'd put people off soon I mentioned that privilege, but also, I guess, in the current climate, being a straight, white, middle class, cis male, or more than middle, I guess, boarding school type, talking about trauma and how hard it was for them at a young liberal arts fest like the Edinburgh Fringe. It was kind of like, it felt a bit of a gamble, or am I going to get any audience? But I think the show, ultimately it's very universal. It's about childhood. It's about feelings. It's about, not knowing who you are, and relationship problems. And it is a comedy every time. It's hard to speak about. I mean, it is, I guess that's my way of telling it is through comedy, and I'm using humor to kind of almost like seduce the audience into the story, but also point the finger, to satirize, to let's open the thing up. But at the heart of it is a true story. The things I'm talking about really affect me. But thankfully, people got it, and it was just so very validating and very enjoyable, very exhausting. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting. That thing of humor. The men's circle, I do a boarding school men's circle once a month, and the topic last night was humor, and I was reflecting on my experience of it, and I think it was quite nasty, the humor at boarding school. It was kind of teasing and being quite nasty. If someone got offended, it's like, well, you just can't take a joke. I'm only joking. You're kicking me. It's like, oh, I'm only joking. It's like, so I love that, you've created this show, because I've obviously seen parts of it. I'd love you to talk us through a little bit of the show. What drew you to set it up in the way you did?
Well, on that note of humor, that's really it. I mean, because I think that was my humor for a lot of lads' humor and banter, and joke, mate, joking and not wanting to be the butt of the joke. And that, I guess, my humor is the clowning at this school in France, or clowning wherever you do it, is about being the idiot on the stage and being seen, kind of being the butt of the joke yourself, which sounds cruel and horrible, but it's actually very freeing, to kind of a relief to be an idiot, and a relief for the audience when you see an idiot on stage. So that kind of, rather than being like winning humor, kind of success, which I guess a lot of stand-ups are, very clever, very funny, but it's different to a kind of humor that is, very kind of revealing, and kind of, it puts you in quite a vulnerable position. So that, but then there's also this thing called bouffon, which is this idea of a kind of people who are like the outcasts of society coming back and shining the light on all the successful, powerful people, the kings and queens and religious leaders. And because they're coming from this kind of exiled position, they've got this perspective where they can take people down, but they're not a threat themselves. So, but that spirit of the show, I guess, comes from that spirit of wanting to kind of get my own back on on the culture of boarding school, on the institutions, the parents, the people who the I guess the damage they're doing to children, and guess coming back as someone who gives the inside scoop and blows the whistle on the whole thing. So that's where the humor is kind of, I'm using the humor to kind of target. And that is the character of Fudgy. Fudgy is your kind of like, fuck your mum. Mate, yeah, where's your suit from? Looks pretty high street. Mate, joke, fuck your mum. No joking, come on, man. Hey, he knows, he's a shagger. Who's shagger? This guy, no. He hasn't shagged anyone in his life. No joking, mate. Banter, come on. All right, where'd you get her, mate? Yeah. Where'd you bag her? Blink twice if you need help. Hey, joke, man. Yeah. This kind of like constant,
And I've known people like that. So it's interesting that it's a parody. So wow.
that was I had a nickname when I grew up, Grievo, like Grievo, mate, Grievo, and this whole thing. I mean, that's the kind of thing. Someone like Fudgy is not too far. I'm ashamed to say to someone I once was, or that kind of approach to staying on top. In a way, it's kind of exhausting. If you ramp that up, and it's kind of like it's kind of like it's quite disturbing. You never see the person. They're always kind of like doing something and avoiding or taking someone down. And at school, I was bullied. I was also a bully. Both sides of that thing. But yeah, the show, it started with a lot of comedy, and then a mixture of that and some real kind of moments, some stuff that come from the workshop, kind of breakthrough moments where one of the therapists leading that group held me and apologized to me as my parents, and still chokes me up thinking about that, what that meant for me, in a group of men to cry and be held, have the back of my neck stroked, so it was so healing for me and for a lot of the other guys there. And that I wanted that to be that was the heart of the show, that in a way that kind of moment, that what that showed me and showed, I guess, others in the group. So it was a mixture of this and this kind of character, quite grotesque, full-on character comedy. So it was Fudgy, the story, it was Fudgy's kind of, I guess, his past catching up with him. And so there were two storylines. There was the Fudgy character, and the show began with young Fudge, who's 7 years old, and it's the eve of him being sent to boarding school, and he's there in all his innocent playfulness, playing with the audience. He's kind of adorable, funny, asking people, do you two love each other? And playing with his bum or his will, his lots of silly kind of endearing stuff that a 7-year-old boy, and then he kind of gets sent off. So that's before we then wake up with Fudgy. And Fudgy is kind of midlife crisis, relationships breaking down. His friend's killed himself. He's at a funeral behaving badly, and comes back home, and he's, we have this thing of Chocky. We have a tut box and chocolate. So Chocky is like, I guess, a kind of, could be cocaine, alcohol, this thing, like Chocky. And you got the Chocky, mate. Have some Chocky. And so he kind of is taking lots of Chocky, and then his tut box kind of opens and draws, kind of haunts him, and there's this kind of eerie sounds that emanate, and was a portal through which to go back to visit his 7-year-old self. So it was kind of like two storylines: Fudgy going down the hole, and young Fudge going off to boarding school, and then they kind of meet. And then there's young Fudge at boarding school getting this kind of training montage through one of the older boys, teaching him how to shut his emotions down and be the bully and look at the yobbos over there in the state school, and this kind of brainwashing till he becomes Fudgy. So there's a moment and it's all very silly. I use like Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones, of the box opens and it's like that Fudgy, this kind of like this ceremony, and then again going back into Fudgy's life, and then he kind of goes on this journey into the woods when he takes a large amount of Chocky with a shaman, and he kind of goes down into this rabbit hole into and ends up facing kind of like these big bosses. There's the Charlie Taylor, the guy he met in the dorm, who's now a dead skull. There's his father, who's represented by a frog. And he has this like court case where he takes on his dad. And then there's himself. He eventually has to face himself and try and re-find a little boy who's trapped in the box. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. That's really powerful. How did you find it writing it? Did you find it cathartic? Was it quite challenging to do? Was it
Yeah, well, it was the first I'd never really written. I'd improvise and off the cuff stuff, but I never really sat down, wrote something, written it properly. And so I was finding my voice, finding my style. And yeah, I found a lot of the stuff that worked was stuff that had been processed in some way. So like the stuff in the workshops where we pretended to be our parents, or when that moment I talked about before, those kind of moments which you'd actually visited properly in a kind of proper space with therapists, or stuff I'd worked through in therapy when I was creating kind of comedy material out of it. It was easy because I had that kind of contact with it. I had that connection. I could do a parody of my mum sending me to boarding school because we kind of in some way had actually revisited it in an authentic way, and when we had to imagine what our mothers were saying to justify what they'd done. So that stuff came easier, whereas some stuff that I wanted to tap into, those nights in the dorm or certain people, other people, and it was quite hard to everything I wrote was quite tropey and a bit superficial, not very funny. But my partner, Lara, who directed the show, she really, I guess, facilitated a lot of that in one way, just saying, that's not funny, that's rubbish. But also she kind of would help me find these lines and find what I was really trying to say. That happened a few times. Like, what are you really trying to say here? Rather than kind of an idea of what I'm trying to say. Rather than I had this court case where I had like two lawyers. It was like a full tribunal debating boarding school with my dad on the stand, and a lot of the stuff from Joy Shavarian or Nick Duffel's book of kind of understanding of the theories of boarding school institutionalization and our government and the Tory part, all this stuff. And it was very kind of, not that it was not true, but it wasn't really what I was trying to say. What I really wanted to say to my dad was, why did you do it? Did you really do it? Because my dad's always said it was best for you. We did what we thought was best. But actually, was there incentive for me? Did it benefit him, to be part of the club and have his boarding school boys, and kind of go up, kind of that social mobility? Did that play up, trying to get to the bottom? Like, why did you really send me to boarding school? Not because it was the best for me, because it was the best for you. That was really what I wanted to say. So rather than all this kind of stuff. So yeah, a lot of the writing process was getting to the point, which I think when you're dealing with, I guess, stuff that has affected you in such a big way, it's quite hard to access that because there's a lot of feeling around it. So you kind of need that distance from it. I'm now going to be creating a new version of the show to tour this year, but it won't change hugely. But I'm looking forward to having had that distance from it to kind of rework some of the bits, improve some of the dialogue, and again, just get closer to my point. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you feel any shame? You mentioned this obviously exposing something. Did you feel any shame after you shared it?
Yeah. I guess sometimes that was just like acting shame, because there's a moment where won't spoil it, but there was a real heart-opening moment where I kind of break down and cry and connect with parts of myself that had been forgotten. And doing that night after night, sometimes it didn't really come, and I had to kind of act it. And there was a bit of shame in kind of going, hang on, I'm trying to speak from the heart and really, open myself to the audience, but I'm acting it. But that, I think that just comes with the territory. So I guess I could hold on to, I'm trying to tell a story here. It doesn't matter if I feel, with acting, it shouldn't matter really if you feel it or not. There's a kind of what I'm trying to. So I guess the writer in me should be happy, and the actor's like, oh, I didn't get that, didn't get those tears. They didn't come. There was also, I guess, people who, a couple of times, audience would walk out the back. Maybe it wasn't the show for them. Thankfully, it didn't happen too often, but it was a bit like, oh God, probably some of the humor is quite. It's quite full on at times. It was kind of more that than someone walking out when I was crying, but yeah, I guess I was always. I mean, the worst things that happened really were flyering people when the response would be, what you're complaining about boarding school? Like, come on, man, a genuine kind of like dismissal of it, and I'm like trying to pitch my show with a flyer in hand, and that was kind of like, oh shit, maybe they're right. There were moments, or some people who'd been to boarding school who were like, I remember coming across these big rugby playing guys who just weren't having any of it. And they were like, what's wrong with Fudgy? What's Fudgy? What's wrong with him? Yeah, seems like a good lad. It's like there was this whole thing. Well, he struggles with stuff, and and they were just like, I just couldn't see it. And I remember trying to like argue with them about boarding school on the streets of Edinburgh, and just had my girlfriend eventually like, come on, you're not going to get anywhere with these guys, So yeah, it was hard at times, but mostly it was an amazing, amazing audience who went on the journey with me. And it was like chipping away at the thing. I think it was like a little bit healing each time that I got received and people got it and were like, yeah, that was tough. Or I see, I see you. I see what you're trying to say, and thank you for a good time as well. And yeah.
Yeah, I found it very powerful to watch you at the boarding school survivors, and everyone gave you a standing ovation
Yeah.
because it really touched us. Just you connecting to your emotions and you sharing, vulnerability that most of us don't dare share, tears. And really thank you and honor you for that.
Thank you. Well, as an actor, it's great to go through, all this stuff as, actors are in it for that. But also I love the idea that and the experience that when you speak your truth, that people listen, and that is like, it's tough sometimes to trust that, I guess a lot of the time, which is the whole thing with boarding schools, that we never felt like we could talk about how we felt at any point, a social suicide, to be a crybaby, or any of the emotions, joy, anger, sadness, whatever it was, you shut it down and make a joke of it, or you dodge it, or you get on with it. So to be, I guess, in the boarding school survivors workshop, but also in some of the men's groups I've been part of, or just with people who are open, that and especially in my relationship, to let yourself kind of to say how you really feel, even if it feels ugly or shameful or kind of pathetic. I have found more often than not that when you genuinely say how you're doing or what's going on, that it's received, people. And I think that's the boarding school thing again. It's like you just would, the daring to do that is, it feels like just, not, you couldn't possibly do that. So that a big part of in my life, I just try and let it through if it's coming, and just let it through. What's the worst that can happen? You're a blubbering mess and people laugh and walk away, but I know there's value in being a blubbering mess. I know I'm more of more value to society being a blubbering mess than a kind of like a guy who's got it all figured out and sorted. Even in my relationship, I think one thing I'm realizing is that when I admit I can't cope, when I, when I, just let myself, struggle and break down a little bit, that actually she's more, that's when she's like, oh, no, I've got you, you're here, rather than like, getting on with it. And sometimes, yeah, you obviously have to get on with it. You can't be a mess all the time. But I think more often than not, we can give ourselves a bit of a break and just fall apart. What if every Friday at 5 p.m. everyone just fell apart and just cried to our friends, our partners, to each other? I think things would be better, and people wouldn't feel so alone with it as well. I think that's also, we're speaking about some friends, like with male suicide, and how part of the problem is you don't feel like anyone else is struggling. That's what's great, like a group of people, when people get to say how they're doing, you're like, oh, I thought I had all this shit, or it's not as bad as what they're going through, or like, oh, I'm glad that even what I'm going through is worse, that other people are struggling in their own way, and there's this kind of inter-vulnerability. That was, who coined that? Have you read the book The Wild Edge of Sorrow? Was it Francis Wild Edge of Sorrow, Francis Mellor or someone?
Well, I think it might
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
Well, yeah.
He talks about this collective grieving into vulnerability that it's just like in British culture is taboo, or we just don't create those spaces. I think in theatre, maybe in theatre is the closest we get to kind of, in general, people go to the theatre and you can cry, or in cinema and feel like you're with other people feeling this thing. But I think it is another thing when you're in a group, in a circle, facing inwards, and you're grieving together. That's been a big game changer for me.
Thank you.
And I'd like to bring that more into the work that I do, the theatre, the comedy, to create an atmosphere where, yeah, we're going to process something or heal something, or together. I guess what is the purpose of it anyway. But I think now we're, I know it's interesting to cross that line, isn't it? To theatre and kind of healing group spaces that I'm sure you've been part of a lot. It's like, and again, bring like family constellations. Have you done any of that?
I know about it, but I've not done any myself.
Yeah, I've done a few of those, and there's also IFS, internal family systems. These are these modalities where people step in as your mum or your dad, or a representation of your libido, or you as a 6-month-old, and something gets played out in the field, in the space. And I think that's what's happening in theatre. There's this kind of archetypes, through archetypal, or archetypes within characters and dynamics, things are getting played out in the space. But it'd be interesting to kind of thin the line between, because theatre is quite, especially traditional theatre, it's a fourth wall, and we sit behind and we project, and kind of it's cathartic for us, but also in the small space I was in Edinburgh with the show, it was really intimate, and it felt like I had the audience there, and we could kind of go through something. And that was just me. If there were more actors, it was more of an ensemble with the audience. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what could happen.
That's really interesting. When I had my breakdown in my 20s, and I spent time in a Buddhist monastery. After I left, I did childcare, and I looked after children. That really helped me get in connection with my young self, and used to tell children stories, make stories up. And one of the things I used to do is I used to get them to close their eyes, and then I would introduce them into the story. And I would get the character I was talking about to say, oh, he now sees you, and then he pulls you into the story. And they just love this, because then when we finished the story the next day, they were like, they were then those characters. Then we were finding these different locations around, and I found it for them and myself transformational when we can bridge that fourth wall, when we can bridge people to come into the performance rather than them just being something separate. And you also mentioned about emotions, and I almost feel, yeah, British society, boys don't cry.
Mm.
That no, you don't cry, and I almost feel I love the film The Work, and
Yeah.
in one instance, have you seen The Work? Oh,
Yeah.
it's just so powerful, and I love that one guy says more or less something along these lines: "As a man cries with his shoulders back and his head up."
Mm.
And I think as a boy, I learned to not cry. And if it was to hide away. And I almost feel that what you're sharing is like, yeah, we can cry with our shoulders back. We can perform, we can be, because that is what makes a man.
Mm.
Mm.
Yes. Mm. Yeah, the work is, yeah, I really just I think that's amazing you're doing it with kids, and that makes you think, doesn't it? All the stuff we're doing now as adults in these kind of healing spaces that kids can also be doing that. That I guess going into, so I think that idea of the imaginary space, that line between the imagination and then
Mm.
real world, like, for kids is probably a little more, you just move back and forth all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then something shuts that down. I mean, again, boarding school, I remember just feeling like I lost my connection to nature and play and the imagination, and suddenly it was
Mm.
buildings, timetables, sport,
Mm.
social dynamics, and this kind of open, breezy, timeless place. Someone used a really nice this idea of kairos and chronos. Have you heard of that? That those
Mm.
Greek words for time. That chronos is like chronological time. This kind of sequential time, sense of time, and then there's kairos, which is like spaciousness. It's like lateral, like openness and space, and almost like infinite time, kind of like
Mm.
it doesn't kind of move on in this way. And it's like those kairos spaces at boarding school, chronos, it was all
Mm.
chronos. And those kairos spaces were few and far between. You couldn't go home and go and sit in your bedroom or lie out on the lawn or feel even safe with mummy and daddy or your brothers and toys or pets. So those kind of like that reverie and that allowing the imagination. I still struggle with my imagination, even with the work I create. Sometimes I'm like, oh God, I let myself just paint and go there. And children can do. I think that's something that boarding school kind of drums out of you, is that capacity to go into worlds. But yeah, I mean, I don't know where I'm going now with this. So many tangents, but
All right.
uh,
I know I love that idea of Chronos and Kairos because yeah, I feel it kind of I feel it links into the Jungian ideas of the archetypes. There's that the masculine and feminine, or certainly the lover aspect, that was squashed at school. There was no ability for us to just be creative or to be sensual, to touch, to love, um, and therefore that was seen as weak. You were gay or you were somehow, so that kind of links in with that kairos of just we need that because we've got left and right hemispheres of the brain. One is Chronos, yes, the right side, but the left side is Kairos. It's
uh,
just create. We just need to create for creation's sake.
I
So,
think that's why love and relationships are, I guess when I was talking about kind of falling apart with my partner, you're then in this spaciousness. You're not. I think there's part of it that feelings are in Kairos. They're in, you open, and we lose that. I think, yeah, it's all the kind of good stuff that is kind of, you don't really get points for in society, is
mm,
in that place.
yeah, and it my sense is it's changing, and I know in big business now they're bringing more creativity in, so they're bringing in that kairos, that I think even Disney did that. They had two rooms for creativity. The first one was just the creative space, and there's lots of cushions and colors and pens, and that space you just created. You
Mm,
weren't allowed to criticize anything and then anyone created in there. It was
mm,
just a space to create. And the
mm,
second room was a space where you would then have people come in and judge, analyze what you've done,
mm,
and then go, well, that's going to work, that's not going to work. But that was after you've got that foundation,
mm,
that strength of, yeah,
mm,
the Snow White and the 10 Dwarfs. No, I don't think that's quite going to work. I think it
mm,
needs to be sort of, you analyze, but you get the kernel of truth there.
mm.
So yeah. So so I'd love for you to just share a little bit. How did your family respond to your show? Have they come and seen it? And
My mum came up to Edinburgh and saw it twice.
Mhm.
She, oh, I think she enjoyed it. I mean, she has been a very good supporter of my work. Always come to my shows. Um, I think there was something, at one point I'm playing her,
Wow.
um, and I mean, my brother came as well. I have three younger brothers. One came, and he thought my dad got it harder than my mum did. My dad was like, "Do you want me to come and see it?" And I said, "And I'll leave that up to you. Hopefully I'll be coming to London." And it's not like I didn't want him to see it, but I didn't want to say, "Oh, come," come. It was kind of like this is some hard stuff, and it's going to be hard for you to watch it, but I feel it's my truth. And so I think he's a bit kind of like, fine, told my brothers he doesn't want me to come. That's fine, but not quite like that. But there's a bit of that. My mum just came up, was like, I'm coming to see the show. um, but I mean, I didn't actually, in a way, there's a kind of distance from it because it's become this thing that it is it's a show. So there is, but I think she did write to me and apologize for sending me to boarding school.
Wow.
And I do think there's a difference between saying it and really, because I think it's still for her, it's like, he makes a big deal out of this boarding school stuff. I think, especially because my other brothers who also went are not complaining, they haven't fallen out of the matrix yet. But yeah, my other brother, another brother, he kind of had really hard, I think he had a really hard time at boarding school and was bullied. And um, I've tried talking to him about it, but he doesn't really want to know. I think maybe he sees me as someone who thrived at boarding school. I was head of school at prep school and good at sport, and I had all the outward markings of. So for me to complain about it, he's like, "You can't complain," you know. But it's that idea, isn't it? There's people who complied, rebelled, and who were crushed. And I think he was someone who was crushed. And it doesn't matter where you are, you're not necessarily going to see that it's boarding school because of the bind of you were lucky. I think he feels my dad. He can't throw that in the face of. That's what those guys I was firing in Edinburgh said. Like, what, you're going to throw all that money your parents spent on your education back in their face? I think two of my brothers feel like that. Another one of my brothers hasn't seen it. He's very he went to boarding school for one term, and I think he was traumatized. I think he worked through that in therapy a bit. He's still people are still on the fence about, I think my family go, "Oh, Tom, he's sensitive, or he's quite difficult." And, this is just typical of Tom to, take this on and make kind of create a problem, or rebel. I think I was a bit of a rebel at school as well. And so it feels like a bit of a rebellion. I guess one of the things that happened in my family is that I was sent away first. And I think I wonder what that was like for my brothers and my parents. I think there must have been a cut-off for them, and this kind of like a placeholder at the table where I come back to every 3 weeks, and then my brothers would be like, "Who's this guy who suddenly which I explore a bit in the show, suddenly come back all toughened up and cut off. And it must have been, I mean, it'd be so interesting. What I'd love to see, like, follow a documentary where it followed that, someone who'd come back and been amongst siblings and how that's affecting the family dynamic. And also, your parents don't grow up around you and you don't grow up around them. So you both miss out on this relationship, which then is kind of like this very regressive thing. Like, my girlfriend grew up around her mum. They have a relationship, a real relationship. I don't think I have a real relationship with my parents. So weirdly, actually, that they come and see the show and they see their, like, mascot son who they sent away. They don't really know. I don't know what I mean. Like, there's the tragedy of it is right there in sitting in the audience and watching your son perform, which is exactly when I started to be an actor, was when, you know, I was doing the school plays and my parents would come and see me perform and be in the audience. And, you know, I think I felt that, you know, that was as close as I got to being seen by, you know, being in my pleasure, being in my freedom, being seen by your mum and dad, you know. But unfortunately, they're sitting in an audience and with all the teachers and people. It's not something special. So maybe, yeah, weirdly, that's as close as I get with them, is when I'm acting and they're in the audience. You know, it's kind of, so yeah.
Sounds quite
Yeah.
sad. Sad that, you know, there's not that connection. I've heard of other exporters talk about the only time they could see their parents was when they played sport and they'd come and watch them.
Was a
But
big part
it
of
was just a handshake at the end of the match
it.
and hi dad, right? See you later.
And you're just getting cheered on. Like, I mean, I love my parents coming to see me. It was always amazing for them to be on the touchline, but, you know, and that is supportive, but it's not real. It's not a, you know, you can't just get cheered on from your touchlines. I mean, that's not parenting. It's support. It is something, but it's not real. It's not. I don't think it's love.
No, no, no.
And that's something that is hard, because, you know, when your parents say, "Well, we did what we thought was best," I genuinely think they believe that. I still don't think that's love. It's love. I think it's actually going, we want to give you this, not love, you know, or there's thought, there is wanting the best, but it's still not love. There can't be love. Sending someone away, like, I always think as well, like, imagine having a relationship with someone, a romantic relationship, and you saw them for a weekend every 3 weeks. And I've done that. I've done some long distance stuff, and it's hard. It's a struggle. It affects the relationship. It's damaging. It's not, you don't really get the full shebang of each other. And I think that's love. I think we think love is this feeling or this idea, but love is real. It's real what you're doing on a day-to-day basis for someone, with someone. And even though my dad was earning money, he was working so he could send me to boarding school. I just don't think, I think still don't think it's love.
No, I agree. I think the institution, I think it's George Monbiot talks about that no matter how good an institution is, they might care for you, but they don't love you. And I was talking to, in my last podcast, a lady called Morag Edwards, who's written a book about attachment theory and her experiences at boarding school in Scotland. And this idea that what children need is the parents' gaze, it's their attention, it's their presence. And 9 months of the year, we're on our own. We don't have that gaze. It doesn't matter how benevolent the institution is, we're not getting that gaze of, okay, I've had a difficult day today, I've been bullied. Who can we tell? No one.
Yeah. And to have those feelings mirrored back, you know.
Mm.
Okay, you feel like this. It's like, you know, touching the body, going, yeah, all right, I see you in this place. But as you're saying, it's interesting. I'm striking up a bit of a kind of late friendship. One of my cousins who didn't go to boarding school. someone who definitely, you know, their family, you know, when I was speaking to my auntie, and it was so different. Like she really struggled with money and didn't know where the next money was coming from, and they grew up state school and had struggles in a different way. And I was speaking with her about my dad and what his ambition, and but I still, it's interesting. I can feel my cousins. I feel like I'm able to lean into this friendship now. Maybe we're starting with my cousin, but being a boarding school boy and him being a state school boy, who I would never, I wasn't friends. I would look down on my cousins and my, you know, and there was this kind of, you know, divide. I'd never be friends with that person like that now, you know, then, because you know, you don't want to be, you know, you got to be with the lads, with the successful, well-bred, or whatever that is, with the kind of, you start thinking about the people you need to be around. But it's interesting. I'm really the shift now in leaning into this stuff with my cousin. It feels like it's only possible because almost I've let this thing is, in processing this stuff, something's leaving me and opening me to everyone, but to, you know, to people of different, it sounds horrible and gross to talk about different class. People haven't grown up with money. And there's something I also feel, the kind of the guilt and shame of having that privilege, and thinking of him in his life where he's struggling with, you know, didn't go travel, you know, he's traveling now, but I went on a gap year, my parents funding, there was stuff I had that he never would have had. And I go, wow, it's something so hard about that. I feel sorry that he didn't have the things I had, but I also know that he had things that I was crippled by. Still, I think life for him is hard in such a different way. But I don't know, that it feels that if you apply that to the nation, there's this kind of divide. And I think, if I can say this, like in coming into my suffering, in relinquishing almost the power of my privileged education, that it is allowing me to see people on the level, and as well as it being healing, it's connecting me with like it's like the other side of this country, or something. I don't know, it's like falling out of the matrix and seeing it, and you then, all your assumptions, everything starts changing. It's like this cascade of realizations and attitudes, sneaky beliefs that are in there that were just given to you, you know, from this special experience. I think people don't want to give it up because they feel they'll lose. You know, there is an advantage to it. There is a status. There's maybe a certain character that comes from it. You know, to be a boarding school, to have survived that. I think really it comes from survival. We think it's actually this privileged, lucky kind of thing, but there's always a bond. I don't know. You find that with boarding school, you know, immediately you're like, oh, there's like a need to ally, or you just know what you've been through, kind of thing. But anyway, to fall out of that is to, yeah, I'm proud now with these. I'm proud of falling apart. I'm proud of like being able to connect with audiences who are not from boarding school backgrounds, to be friends with my cousin who didn't have that, and feel like, in a way, like I've earned my right to be amongst other, you know, the people, community that isn't boarding school elite kind of club-like community. Yeah.
Thank you.
Got onto that, but
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, that's very powerful. I can really feel that. And I mean, we're just coming to the end for today. I mean, I'd love for you maybe just to share how people find out you've got the show in London in April. You're going to start doing this tour that's potentially at some point this year. how do people find out about these? And
Yeah. So, well, I can find out. I can say that it's at the Osso Arts Theatre in Barnes, 3rd to the 6th of April. You type in Goodbye Uncle Fudgy or go to, OSO Arts in Barnes. I'm waiting to hear on funding for kind of taking the show and I guess refining it so it can go on tour. So I've applied, for this funding from Creative Scotland. I'm based in Edinburgh now, to get a musical score composed, to have like a set designed, to work with a really kind of superstar physical comedian called Trygve Wakenshaw, who's had a lot of success in his comedy shows. And then we'd look to tour it. I think that would be spring next year. And we may be taking it to the Edinburgh Festival again, but I guess there's Instagram, Uncle Fudgy, Goodbye Fudgy on Twitter. I'm building a website which should be, if you type tomgreaves.net, but it's kind of in this in-between part of, like, we've got these 5 shows in London, and then we'll still be building to future shows. So stay tuned, and I'll for more Fudgy.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll put links into the description so people can look at you on Twitter and Instagram. And then
And it is comedy. I mean, I can't help but get so heavily into the kind of talking about this stuff, but it's heavy. But there is, there is a lot of lightness and show. I mean, dark, stuff like this is good material for comedy.
Yeah. Well, if we look at a lot of the Britain's both most well-known comedians from the last 50 to 100 years, most were at boarding school. Peter Cook, Harry Enfields, Trigger Happy TV, Dom Jolly, all boarding school. All of the Monty Python. It's like, oh, there's a theme here.
Well, like you were saying earlier, like using humor as a way to like deal with stuff is like in the bones of that kind of boarding school psyche.
Yeah. Well,
What I
bless
like getting underneath it is, all that I'd love. It'd be amazing, wouldn't it, to talk to all those comedians and see. I don't know. I wonder if they know that that's where their humor comes from, or why they got into comedy.
I don't know. Dom Jolly, I think a lot of them do say, I think Eric Idle says, you know, where did my humor come from? Well, that would be 10 years at boarding school or something like that. I think Dom Jolly does say, I hated my boarding school. Doesn't say if it links into the comedy. But I think there's a few of them who are like going, oh, maybe that's. I think Peter Cook, it was to defend against because he wasn't very wealthy. He was at Radley, and people were insulting him. So that's where his humor came from, to protect himself. So yeah.
It's
Well,
interesting because I remember my dad used to say, like, oh, John Cleese, hilarious, but he's very boring in interviews, and Rowan Atkinson. And, in a way, I mean, it's not, I feel I'm boring, but I haven't been like making loads of jokes. But it's interesting that you speak, in Rowan Atkinson or John Cleese's case, they're speaking from kind of a place that's not like loads of jokes, but they have part of them that it's completely that. It leans into that the comic performance. And it's interesting that there's that. And I think that's the same with me. Like I love going into that, but it's not necessarily my, you're speaking to me. I'm not like, you be like, oh, that guy's a funny guy to have on the show. But I think there is this, it's like almost like this capacity you have for it that's developed from masking, from wearing a mask, pretending, doing silly stuff to make people laugh as a way of coping. I think my skills as an actor they come from their survival skills. I think that's why I think that's why I am a good actor, because I can, pretend under fire. God forbid anyone know who I really am and how I really feel.
Well, I feel you show that, and that's really beautiful. That that this is who I am. So bless you. Right, I better head off. I have another meeting now. But thank you so much for your time, guys. Please do go and see Tom's show live. It's really powerful. So bless you. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Piers.